This is MrsAgroSquerril standing in for Agro while he recovers from some vocal strain. It could be a while yet, but he is recovering. I hope you enjoy. A Class 6 Waterworld, Class 9 Deathworld. Humans made it a resort by Wooden Manager 969. Algai 6 was a rather odd world within Confederation space. It was a Class 6 Waterworld. This meant that it had absolutely no land masses at all. The entire surface of the planet was completely covered in water, with a minimum depth of not less than standard 20 meters. Normally, a Class 6 Waterworld would barely make it as a Class 4 Deathworld, mostly due to the fact that some sodium-based lifeforms would likely suffer a rather gruesome death. However, Algai 6 was special. Not only was it a waterworld, but it had underwater plate tectonics and deep-sea heated vents. But it also boasted an atmosphere that was 12% oxygen, 11% nitrogen, and 9% carbon dioxide, with the remaining 68% consisting of argon, helium, and other trace gases. This made it toxic to most species within the galaxy, and then there were the humans. Humanity was still a relative upstart within the Confederation. In fact, the induction into the Confederation was quite accidental. Most accounts seem to indicate that humanity had figured out how to develop a drive system that would have allowed them to travel at 33% the speed of light. This was, of itself, no small achievement. However, there was a problem. During the first live pilot test of the system, there was an accident, some sort of glitch, which was logged and studied, allowing the humans to replicate it. The glitch, which is how it is now known, allowed a sudden shift from traveling a scant 33% the speed of light to traveling at nearly 9 times the speed of light. It was this glitch that landed that early live pilot test to enter orbit above the Confederation's Central Hub Station, in orbit above Rigel Prime. The pilot had been hoping to go to Mars and get back to Earth in time for something called bowling night. Thus it was that humans would enter the Confederation, albeit in a protectorate status, and no right to vote. Algai 6 was discovered about 10 standard galactic cycles later, or rather 10 galactic cycles after adjusting the galactic calendar to include Earth metrics. The Chalna, a reptilian race, were the first to discover it, and found it disconcerting. It was not normal by most known planetary standards, with only a few planets, including Earth, which was, of itself, a Class 13 Deathworld, being worse. For all practical purposes, it had been determined that Algai 6 was a dangerous place, and nobody should be allowed to set foot upon it, never mind that it had absolutely no land masses to speak of, or otherwise step foot upon. Then the humans spoke up. "So what you're saying is that this place is completely covered in water?" asked the primary human representative, a female who seemed well advanced in years. "Yes, there is no known land mass anywhere on its surface," the Grand Chancellor, a crystalline entity in a mechanized suit, said. "Any life forms?" the human representative asked. "Not that anyone has been able to detect," a member of the initial survey team replied. "So anyone planning to establish an outpost there? You know, for research?" inquired a younger human, a male of the species. "Did you not understand that Algai 6 has been determined too dangerous to step foot upon?" asked the Grand Chancellor. "So far, all I've heard is there is no land for miles upon miles. Reminds me of my time in the Navy back on Earth. You sail far enough from land, and there is nothing but empty ocean," the human male said. "Honestly, if the humans want to establish an outpost for research, I don't see why it should be an issue," remarked a venerable female, whose own race very much resembled the humans, and whom the humans were under the protectorate of. "If your planet wants to take responsibility for what fate befalls the humans on Algai 6, then we will consider a provisional establishment of a human outpost. But the Council cannot take responsibility if any harm befalls them," the Grand Chancellor said. "Not a problem. We will take care of ourselves. No worries," the human male said enthusiastically. "Griffin, please," the human female said, clearly disturbed by his enthusiasm. "Very well. If the representative from the Narrated is willing to accept the responsibility, we'll permit it," the Grand Chancellor said, though their colours had shifted from a light purple to a pale red. "It will be fine. We can monitor and report back as necessary. the Honourable representative said. So it was that the humans had been granted provisional permission to establish their first research outpost in Confederation space. However, as history records, this didn't have the results that the Confederacy had hoped for, and in fact, it went a different direction almost immediately. Worse still, there are some who think that the Honourable were complicit in the whole affair, though they still maintain their claim of plausible deniability, stating they had no idea this would happen. Still, it happened. Initially, the humans did set up a proper floating research station. During that time, they made some interesting discoveries regarding the Alga 6 and its makeup. While there were no land masses on the surface, as the initial survey teams had already noted, there were, in fact, large mountain ranges deep within its oceans. Incidentally, it should also be noted that for some odd reason that even the humans aren't entirely certain of, the water covering the surface of Alga 6 is freshwater, which even defied what they expected, given that the majority of their planet's surface is covered in salt water. For the first cycle, after being granted permission to establish a research outpost, everything went surprisingly well. However, as is the case with humans, that didn't last long. It started innocently enough, a simple request for the establishment of a civilian food vendor, as the researchers complained that they didn't always have time to cook for themselves. Permission was granted, as many understood how difficult it can be to prepare meals when you have a pile of research to tackle. However, the next request was for a tailoring shop, as they complained that their clothes needed mending, and nobody had time for that. This too was granted. Then they found the ruins. The ruins sat at a depth of 50 standard meters, and the research team supposedly didn't have the proper equipment to reach them. This information was sent in with a request for a submersible vehicle, a team of trained divers, and a scuba shop. For reference, scuba apparently stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Initially, the council wanted to send the Rielki, a race of amphibians, to check out the ruins, but they refused, citing too high of an atmospheric oxygen content. So the scuba shop and submersible were sent, reluctantly. While the ruins were of great curiosity to the Confederation, as they were apparently built by a now long extinct species that specialized in carving stone structures, the humans and the Honourable took a far keener interest in them. Citing a need to improve funding for their research, a request for permission to allow other researchers who were paid to come and examine the ruins was made and granted, and quite regrettably at that. However, by then, it was too late. To be fair, the first few groups were honest researchers. They conducted surveys, managed to find carved stone tablets, and even managed to decode some of them. However, with each new batch of researchers, both from Earth and Gnarbala Prime, the population of Alga 6 began to grow, and the floating research station also grew, to the point where it had become a full city, complete with apartment complexes, bars, and even a casino. And then they had managed to put in a water park. When the humans and Gnarbalians were brought before the council to give a report regarding the situation, particularly how what was meant to have been a scientific research outpost had become, as the humans called it, a resort, nobody was prepared for the answer. Nor could we have been, as this line of thinking hadn't been seen in the Confederation in over a millennia. "What exactly has happened?" intoned the Grand Chancellor. "What do you mean?" asked the human representative. "We granted permission to establish a provisional research outpost. You've turned it into a resort destination," remarked the Grand Chancellor. "In all fairness, scientific research is quite expensive," the Gnarbalian representative said. "Expensive? How so?" asked the Chalnar representative. "Well, the fact of the matter is that we're funding this whole research venture ourselves, and the Confederacy hasn't given us so much as a single dime to help out," the human said, an odd-looking smile on his face. "Preposterous. We've granted every permission you've requested," the Grand Chancellor retorted. "Granting permission, Chancellor, is not the same as providing funding. That was why we made those requests. We needed funding to keep our research going," replied the Gnarbalian representative, her eyes solidifying into a cold stare. "Yep, Not once did the Confederation offer any sort of help with funding this project, and let me assure you that it has been quite expensive. And yet, without any financial help on your end, we've been expected to provide you with the results of our research. That doesn't exactly strike me as fair, the human said, his voice taking on an almost accusatory tone. Might I remind you that Earth is in a protectorate state? Remarked the Grand Chancellor. Yes, and might I remind you that the Gnarbalians are Earth's overseers in that protectorate status. And I might mention that this station was built by us almost a millennia before the Confederacy existed, retorted the Gnarbalian. Meaning? Asked the Grand Chancellor, their crystalline structure turning a pale black. Gnarbalia is a charter member of the Confederation and holds a majority share in terms of all shipping within the Confederacy. The fact is, without us, there is no Confederacy, the Gnarbalian said, her words cutting through the coldness of the council chamber like a hot knife through butter, and causing several representatives present to take a leave of absence, while others began to review the Galactic Charter. Just what do you propose then? Asked a member of the Kluxian, an avian species that rarely left their homeworld due to a disdain for anything metallic. It is quite simple. For the research to continue, we need to maintain funding. Alga 6 isn't that bad of a place, and has limitless potential for both scientific exploration and vacation options for species capable of surviving. Honestly, it's a lot like being in Hawaii, albeit without any land, the human said with a slight chuckle at the part about no land. In short, you want the Confederacy to declare Alga 6 a resort planet, so that you can continue your research, the Grand Chancellor said. More or less. In doing so, we will require no actual funding from the Confederacy, and if you check your datapad, you would know just how much this has cost us already, the human said, causing many representatives to look at their datapads and then glaringly at the Grand Chancellor. These numbers can't be right. You've only been there for a standard galactic cycle, the Grand Chancellor said in shock. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain a submersible, or to get supplies to keep up on basics like food and clothing? Asked the human, now smirking. So what happens if we say no? Asked the Grand Chancellor. Gnarbalia still technically owns the station. I think you can guess from there, the Gnarbalian representative said, with a slight smile of her own. Very well. We cannot argue these numbers, nor would it do well to halt your research, the Grand Chancellor conceded. Well, one last thing, the human said. What? Asked the Grand Chancellor, albeit reluctantly. If we're going to continue to share our findings, we need more representatives from the Confederacy helping us. We don't mind sending photos and documents to those who can't actually come planetside, but those who can, we'd appreciate if they would, the human said. Understood, but I will have to leave that decision to the individual members to decide on their own. For now, dismissed, the Grand Chancellor said. Their hue having changed to a very sickly pale yellow, an admission of defeat among their kind. Less than 2 galactic days had passed before advertisements were seen for Alga 6, boasting of water parks, underwater expeditions, and even a complete undersea hotel experience. Perhaps the Confederacy shouldn't have been surprised that the humans would turn a Class 9 Deathworld into a resort. Maybe we should have understood that humans and Gnarbalians were both Class 13 Deathworlders. Yet, in our own lack of oversight, the humans took a Class 9 Deathworld and made it a resort. Well, I'll be on vacation next week. I understand that water skiing on Alga 6 is actually quite invigorating. Glad I'm from a Class 13 Deathworld. End of story.
I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.